The call came while I was sitting in a glass-walled closing room at the title company, with the last signature of my parents' house waiting in front of me. Maple Street was already sold. The young couple had their keys. The proceeds were sitting in a settlement account, one wire release away from disappearing into the debt my husband said would ruin him. Across from us, the closing officer kept her eyes on the file with the practiced quiet of someone who knew when not to look too closely. The room smelled like printer toner and burnt coffee. There were framed certificates on the wall, a bowl of cheap peppermints near the door, and my parents' house reduced to a stack of paper between us. Beside Daniel's elbow sat a sealed FedEx envelope I didn't remember seeing before. My name was printed on the label, but the handwriting beneath it was his. Daniel leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Just sign it, Claire. One signature, and we can finally breathe." The house was already gone. All that was left was the money, and Daniel was watching it like it had never belonged to me. I looked down at the wire release authorization. The lender named in the payoff packet had a clean, corporate name. The recipient on the wire instructions had a different one. Daniel had explained that already. A servicing account, a special structure, something temporary, something normal. I had nodded when he explained it because exhaustion does that to a person. Exhaustion makes a familiar voice feel safer than a strange document. The black pen rested beside my thumb. Daniel's knee bounced once under the table, then stilled. "Claire," he whispered, "please." That was when my phone rang. Westbridge Bank. Westbridge was the bank handling the outgoing wire from the settlement account. For a second, I almost ignored it. Daniel's eyes moved to the screen before mine did. "Let it go," he said. He had never asked me to ignore a call from a bank before, so I answered. "Mrs. Whitaker?" "Yes." "This is Evelyn Hart from Westbridge Bank's wire verification team. I'm calling about the settlement release scheduled for authorization this morning. Are you currently at the title company?" I looked at Daniel. His face did not change much. Only the small practiced softness around his mouth disappeared. "Yes," I said. "Are you alone?" I looked across the table at my husband. "No." There was a pause. Then Evelyn's voice lowered. "Then please listen carefully. If the release is in front of you, do not sign it yet. The payoff packet your closing office submitted lists one creditor, but the wire instructions name a different recipient." Daniel leaned toward me. "Who is that?" I covered the phone. "The bank." His hand moved toward mine, not violently, not fast enough for the closing officer to look up, but fast enough for my body to understand before my mind did. I pulled the phone closer to my ear. Evelyn continued, calm and precise. "I am not saying anything has happened. I am saying your house proceeds should not be released until the recipient is independently verified." Daniel smiled at the closing officer. Then, through his teeth, he whispered to me, "Hang up. This is routine." The closing officer glanced at us, then politely looked back down. There are rooms where people can destroy you without raising their voice. This was one of them. I looked at the pen. Then I looked at the FedEx envelope. My name. His handwriting. Daniel's hand rested beside it, too still now. Evelyn said, "Mrs. Whitaker, if the release is in front of you, do not sign it until the recipient is verified." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Claire." There was a time when he only had to say my name that way, and I would soften. 12 years of marriage can train your body before your mind catches up. A certain tone, a certain pause, a certain pressure beneath the table. You begin to answer before the question arrives. But that morning, in that glass-walled room, with my parents' house sitting between us in paper form, I did not answer him. I put the pen down. The sound was small, barely anything, plastic against polished wood. But Daniel heard it like a door locking. His eyes went to the pen first, then to me, and for the first time in 12 years, I saw real fear in my husband's face. Not fear of losing his company, not fear of debt, not even fear of shame. Fear that I had stopped moving exactly where he had pointed me. The closing officer cleared her throat softly. "Mrs. Whitaker, would you like a moment?" I stood. My legs felt calm in a way that frightened me. "Yes," I said. "I think I need more than a moment." Daniel rose too quickly. "Claire, We don't have time for this. I turned to him. He had said those words many times in the last month. We don't have time. The lender won't wait. This has to happen now. If you love me, don't make me beg. That was the trick. Panic does not give a woman room to think. Panic stands behind her chair and calls itself marriage. I held the phone against my ear. Evelyn was still there. Mrs. Whitaker, she said, quieter now, you have the right to verify where your money is going. Your money, not our money, not Daniel's emergency, not the family's survival. Your money. Something inside me flinched at the phrase, not because it was harsh, because it was the first honest thing anyone had said in weeks. Daniel reached for the FedEx envelope and slipped it into his folder. I noticed. So did he. His face went flat. Claire, he said again. But this time my name did not sound like love. It sounded like a warning. I walked out of the closing room with my phone in my hand and a wire release unsigned on the table behind me. The young couple already had the keys to Maple Street. My mother's kitchen was no longer mine. My father's porch belonged to strangers. I had already lost the house. But that morning, by the width of one unsigned line, I had not yet lost myself. And Daniel knew it. Maple Street was never impressive from the road. It was a small white house with a narrow porch, a green front door my mother repainted every few years, and a pear tree in the backyard that leaned slightly toward the kitchen window, as if it wanted to listen in. People like Margaret Whitaker would have called it modest. People like my mother called it enough. My father repaired clocks in a shop downtown. He came home every evening smelling faintly of brass, oil, and winter air, even in July. He had careful hands, patient hands. Hands that could hold the smallest broken thing without making it feel foolish for breaking. My mother taught second grade at Maple Ridge Elementary. She brought home construction paper hearts in February and glitter on her sleeves in December. She kept a blue teacup near the stove and drank from it every morning while the kettle clicked and the radio murmured weather reports into the kitchen. That house had sounds. My father's pocket watches ticking on the dining table. My mother humming near the sink, rain on the back steps. The furnace knocking awake in the dark. On the kitchen wall, beside the pantry door, my mother marked my height in pencil every birthday until I was 17 and told her I was too old for it. She marked it anyway. When my father died, my mother stopped sleeping in their bedroom for 3 months. She slept on the couch with the lamp on and the television turned low. I would come by after work and find her wrapped in his old cardigan, one hand resting on the arm of the couch like she was waiting for him to come home late and apologize. When my mother died 2 years later, Maple Street became the only place in the world where grief knew where to find me and still left me standing. I kept the house because selling it felt like throwing away the last room where my name sounded the way my parents said it. Daniel came into my life after my mother's funeral. He was not dramatic. That was part of what made him easy to trust. He did not arrive with declarations. He came with practical things: a porch bulb, a roofer's number, soup when I was sick. Once, in the middle of a storm, he fixed the leaking downspout in his dress shirt while I watched from behind the glass. He smiled at me through the rain. I thought that meant something. Maybe it did then. That is the cruel part. Not every lie begins as a lie. Some people love you for a while, then discover what they can take from you and call that love too. After we married, Daniel moved into Maple Street. For the first few months, he said all the right things. This house has soul. I like that the floors creak. Your mother had taste. He helped me repaint the guest room. He planted rosemary near the back steps. He stood in the kitchen one evening while I cooked and said, "One day we'll build something that's ours." I thought he meant a future. I did not hear the warning. His mother heard it, though. Margaret Whitaker had the kind of politeness that arrived sharpened. She never insulted you directly if she could place the insult on a silver tray and make you thank her for it. The first time she came to Maple Street for dinner, she walked from room to room with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "It's sweet," she said, touching the back of my mother's old dining chair. "Very sentimental, but at some point, a wife has to stop living inside her childhood." Daniel was standing beside me. He did not defend me. He only slipped his hand around mine beneath the table and squeezed. I thought he was asking me not to be hurt. Later, I understood he was asking me not to make trouble. Natalie, Daniel's younger sister, was quieter than Margaret, but not kinder. She had a bright laugh and a soft voice, and every time she visited Maple Street, her eyes moved across the rooms like she was counting things. The original woodwork, the backyard, the widening neighborhood, the distance to the new commuter line being built 3 blocks away. She once stood in my kitchen looking through the back window at the pear tree and said, "You must get offers all the time." I laughed because I thought she was making conversation. She was not. Natalie always treated Maple Street like an insult. Not because it was expensive, because it was mine. Then there was Sophie Vale. A name I heard only in pieces. The first time was in a shoebox Daniel kept at the top of our closet. Old college photos, a summer house. Daniel younger, thinner, standing beside a woman with dark hair and a smile that looked practiced but effective. "That's Sophie," he said, when I asked. Then he kissed my forehead. "Ancient history." He said it so lightly that I felt silly for wanting to ask more. The second time was at one of Margaret's charity dinners. I was standing near a table of small desserts I did not know how to pronounce when Margaret introduced Sophie to a group of donors. "Sophie has always been the kind of woman who understands how this family works." She said it while I stood close enough to hear. I looked over. Sophie wore cream silk and small gold earrings. She laughed with her head tilted slightly back, like every room had been built to catch her best angle. Daniel was across the room speaking to someone else, but when Sophie laughed, his eyes moved. Only once. Only briefly. Enough. I told myself marriage was not made of glances. I told myself a woman could not spend her life afraid of every ghost her husband once loved, so I let it go. I did not understand then that some things only look small because the wall has not fallen yet. As Daniel's business grew, the rooms around him grew colder. Better offices, better suits, more charity dinners where women smiled too gently when I did not know the right names to wear. Daniel changed slowly. Not enough for a person to leave. Only enough for a person to start apologizing for noticing. He began saying things like, "We've outgrown this place," or, "You cling to the past because it asks nothing from you," or, "A married woman should think about the future, not just her parents' memory." I would look around the kitchen after those conversations and feel ashamed for loving the walls. Then I would see my mother's pencil marks beside the pantry, and the shame would pass. Maple Street was not a museum. It was proof that before I was Daniel's wife, I had been somebody's daughter. Then one night in October, Daniel came home with his shirt wrinkled, his eyes red, and a brown envelope in his hand. He did not kiss me. He did not take off his coat. He walked straight to the kitchen table and placed the envelope beside the framed photograph of my parents. "Claire," he said. His voice broke just enough. "I did something stupid. And because I loved him, I sat down." The first thing Daniel did was apologize. That should have comforted me. Instead, it made me listen harder. "I thought I could fix it before you had to know," he said. He sat at the kitchen table with both hands around a glass of water he never drank. The overhead light made him look paler than he was. Outside, the pear tree moved in the wind, scraping softly against the window. "What happened?" I asked. He pushed the envelope toward me. Inside were loan documents, payment notices, forwarded emails, printed statements with highlighted sections. Some pages looked official, some looked old, some had been copied badly, the print crooked near the edges. But fear does not read carefully at first. Fear sees numbers. Fear sees deadlines. Fear sees the person you love sitting across from you, breaking. Daniel said his company had taken on a business loan during a rough quarter. He said he had used short-term financing to keep payroll steady, then rolled one obligation into another. He said a deal fell through. He said the lender was escalating. He said if the money did not come quickly, everything could collapse. "My company," he said, "my name, everything I built." I remember the word "my." At the time, I heard desperation. Later, I heard ownership. "How much?" I asked. He closed his eyes. Then he slid one page toward me. The number sat there in black ink, clean, unemotional, nearly the value of Maple Street. I felt the room tilt, though nothing moved. "Daniel." "I know." He put his face in his hands. "I know what I'm asking." But he didn't. He was asking for the porch where my father drank coffee. He was asking for the kitchen wall where my mother measured me in pencil. He was asking for the bedroom where I had slept after both funerals, because the house was the only thing left that knew how to hold me. He was asking for the last place in the world that had never asked me to prove I deserved to stay. There has to be another way, I said. Daniel looked at me as if he had been waiting for that sentence. He had answers ready. A personal loan would take too long. His line of credit was maxed. Selling his car would be symbolic, not useful. Borrowing from Margaret would mean letting her control the company. Bringing in an outside investor would destroy everything he had built. Each option died in his mouth before I could touch it. I checked, he said. I checked everything. That was another thing I used to believe about Daniel. If he said he had checked everything, I stopped looking. I asked about his office lease, his equipment, the watch he wore that cost more than my mother's first car. He gave me numbers, penalties, deadlines, reasons. Not one of them sounded false. That was what made the trap work. A good lie does not stand in an empty room. It leans against enough truth to look tired. Then he lifted his face. His eyes were wet. I know I have no right, he said. But you're my wife. You're the only person I have. I looked at my parents' photograph. Daniel looked too. That was when he said it. If your father were here, he wouldn't let me drown. The sentence landed softly. That was what made it cruel. He did not throw my father's memory at me. He draped it over my shoulders and waited for me to carry it. For a moment, I could almost hear my father's voice. Not because Daniel was right, because grief makes you easy to reach when someone knows exactly which name to use. I did not say yes that night, but something in me stepped backward. Daniel saw it. The next morning, Margaret came over with a white bakery box tied in gold string. She hugged me before she even took off her coat. That was how I knew Daniel had called her. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "I'm so sorry." Her perfume filled my hallway, expensive flowers and something sharp beneath. We sat in the living room. She did not touch the cake. She looked around the room as if it had already begun belonging to someone else. "A house is wood," she said gently. "A marriage is flesh and blood." I stared at her. "My parents left me this house." "And now," she said, "perhaps they can help you save your husband." There it was. A knife laid flat on the table so politely no one could accuse it of being raised. I looked at Daniel then, waiting for him to say my parents were not a savings account. He looked down at his hands. Margaret saw the silence and stepped into it like a woman entering a room she owned. "Your mother loved him too, didn't she?" she asked. "She would not want you alone in that house while your marriage collapsed." Alone in that house. She said it like a diagnosis. Like Maple Street was not shelter, but illness. And Daniel still said nothing. Again, that hand under the table. Again, that squeeze. Again, me mistaking pressure for comfort. Natalie called that evening. She used a soft voice, too. "I heard things are difficult," she said. "They are." "I'm sorry, really." There was a pause. Then she asked, "Did the realtor give you a realistic number?" "Not, 'Are you okay?' Not, 'I know this must hurt.' Just the number." At the time, I told myself everyone handled stress differently. Natalie had always been practical. Margaret had always been strategic. Daniel had always been proud. I made excuses for all of them because the alternative was too frightening. That week, Daniel began mentioning Sophie. Not often, just enough. He said she knew people in private financing. He said she had experience restructuring business debt. He said he hated asking her, but he needed every option. He said her name carefully, as if saying it hurt him more than it hurt me. The first time I stiffened, he saw it. "Please don't make this about something it isn't," he said. I apologized. Imagine that. I apologized for being wounded by the name of the woman his mother had once praised in front of me, like a replacement kept polished on a shelf. Daniel began falling apart in ways that kept me close. He stopped eating dinner. He sat in the dark living room after midnight. He left his office door open just enough for me to see him staring at spreadsheets with his head in his hands. Once, I woke at 3 a.m. and found him sitting on the edge of the bed. "I hate that I'm dragging you into this," he said. But every day, he dragged me deeper. He never said, "Sell the house." Not at first. He said, "I don't see another way." He said, "I can't ask you." He said I would never forgive myself. He said everything except the words, because a decent man asking for sacrifice is easier to love than a selfish man demanding it. So I became the one who said it. What if we sold Maple Street? Daniel did not answer right away. His face folded. He reached for me. Claire, no. But his hands came around me too quickly. His breath left him too easily. You saved me, he whispered into my hair. I stood there in my mother's kitchen with my husband's arms around me and thought I was doing what love required. His hands did not shake. Not once. The debt was real enough to scare me. The emergency was the lie. 3 days later, I called a realtor. 2 weeks later, we had offers. And one night, after I had signed the listing agreement, I woke up thirsty and walked toward the kitchen. The back door was cracked open. Daniel stood outside near the steps, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low. She agreed, he said. It's done. I opened the door. Daniel turned. He ended the call before I could hear the voice on the other side. Who was that? I asked. He smiled, not warmly, carefully, just someone trying to help us. Then he stepped inside and kissed my cheek. His lips were cold from the night air. Maple Street sold faster than I was ready for. The realtor said the market was strong, the neighborhood was changing, young families wanted character homes close to the train line. Character homes. That was what strangers called a place where your mother had once stood barefoot in the kitchen, slicing apples into a chipped bowl. The buyers were kind, that made it harder. They were a young couple named Ben and Anna. Anna was 6 months pregnant and walked through the house with one hand resting on her stomach. Ben asked questions about the pipes, the roof, the pear tree. Would it be okay if we kept it? He asked, standing in the backyard. The tree? He nodded. It feels like it belongs here. It does, I said. I did not tell him my father planted it the spring I turned 9, or that every September my mother turned its fruit into jars of sweetness we kept through winter. I only said, please keep it. Daniel stood near the fence, checking his phone. The packing took 3 days. I wrapped my father's clocks, folded my mother's tablecloths, and found birthday cards signed in 2 handwritings I would never see again. I placed the blue teacup in newspaper, then unwrapped it once because I needed to see it whole. Daniel did not help much. He said it was too emotional. I can't watch you do this, he told me. But he could leave the house to take calls. He could answer messages in the garage. He could speak about the next chapter with a strange brightness in his voice, then lower it when he saw me listening. On the last morning, I walked through Maple Street alone. The rooms were almost empty, and empty rooms make a person honest. The living room looked smaller without furniture. The hallway echoed. In the bedroom, a rectangle of darker paint marked where my parents' wedding photograph had hung for 30 years. In the kitchen, the pencil marks remained beside the pantry. Claire, age 6. Claire, age 9. Claire, age 12. My mother had written the dates in her careful script, a history of height, a record of someone paying attention. I placed my fingers over the last mark. 17. I remembered rolling my eyes that day. Mom? Seriously? She had laughed. Let me have this. I let her. I did not know then how grateful I would be for every proof that she had once stood close enough to measure me. Outside, Daniel honked once. Not long. Just enough. I looked toward the window and saw him in the driver's seat, one hand on the wheel, the other holding his phone. He did not look like a man waiting for his wife to say goodbye to the only home she had left. He looked inconvenienced. That was the word that came to me. Not cruel. Not yet. Inconvenienced. I closed my eyes. That sound did something to the room. It made my grief feel inconvenient, too. When I came out, Anna was standing near the porch with tears in her eyes. We'll take care of it, she said. I believed her. That helped. And it hurt. At the title company on Friday, the sale closed. Papers moved from one hand to another. Keys passed. Signatures dried. Maple Street became a line item in a system that did not know my mother's name. But the proceeds did not leave immediately. They went into a settlement account. The final wire release, Daniel said, would happen Monday morning. The lender needed everything before noon or the situation could escalate. That was the word he kept using. Escalate. It made the danger sound tall. It made my hesitation sound childish. Because Maple Street had been in my name, because it had come from my parents, because the settlement agent had worked with me from the first listing appointment, the final authorization still had to come from me. Daniel did not like that. He tried not to show it. But I saw the muscle in his jaw move when the closing officer said, "Mrs. Whitaker will need to confirm the outgoing wire." He smiled too quickly. Of course. Later, I learned he had already tried to make himself the primary contact for the payoff packet. The settlement office corrected it. They had seen my name on the deed, my signature on the sale documents, the old file I had carried in myself because I was the seller on record. Whatever Daniel sent the night before, the final call still had to come to me. Maple Street had never been Daniel's. That was the one thing he could not change. On Sunday evening, Daniel sat beside me at the small dining table in our temporary apartment and slid another stack of papers toward me. "This just authorizes the payoff." I looked at the pages. "This protects us." I kept looking. "This keeps the lender from escalating." There was that word again. He reached across the table and covered my hand. "We're almost through it." The apartment around us was expensive and empty. White walls, rental furniture, a kitchen that smelled like no one. Most of my life was still in boxes stacked against the wall, labeled in my handwriting. Kitchen. Books. Mom. Dad. Daniel had sent the payoff packet to the settlement agent the night before, saying the lender needed everything prepared before noon. He had been very efficient. Men who are afraid sometimes become efficient. So do men who are hiding something, Margaret called that night. "Let Daniel handle the transfer, sweetheart," she said. "Men like him understand these things better when they're under pressure." I looked at the boxes along the wall. At my mother's name written in black marker on cardboard. "Maybe," I said. Margaret paused. She was not used to maybe. The next morning, I dressed carefully because buttons and clean hair felt like the last pieces of order I controlled. Daniel drove us to the title company. He barely spoke. In the closing room, the closing officer set the wire release in front of me. Daniel placed his folder on the table. The sealed FedEx envelope sat beside his elbow. My name printed on the label, his handwriting beneath. I noticed it. He noticed me noticing. Then he smiled. "Almost done," he said, and my phone rang. After I walked out of the closing room, Daniel followed me into the hallway. The title company had gray carpet and framed photographs of smiling homeowners on the walls. People holding keys, people standing under sold signs, people beginning. I stood beneath one of those photographs and felt like someone had taken a picture of a language I no longer spoke. Daniel kept his voice low. "Claire, you are letting a stranger scare you. She's verifying the transfer. She doesn't understand the arrangement. Then the lender can explain it." His eyes hardened. "The lender doesn't work on your timeline." "No," I said. "Apparently everyone works on yours." For a moment he looked at me as if he might say something honest. Then the closing officer opened the door behind us. "Would you like us to pause the appointment?" she asked. Daniel turned on his public face so quickly I almost admired it. "Yes," he said smoothly. "My wife is emotional. She just sold her childhood home." My wife is emotional. There are sentences that seem harmless until they are placed at the right angle. That one cut clean. I looked at him. He gave me a small, warning smile. I turned to the closing officer. "Yes," I said. "Please pause it." Daniel's smile disappeared. "I need 24 hours, I said. "Claire." "My emotions can wait 24 hours, I said. "So can your emergency." The closing officer looked down at her folder. Professional people see more than they say. Outside, the parking lot was bright with late morning sun. Too bright. The kind of light that makes everything look exposed. Daniel unlocked the car but did not open my door. He always opened my door in public. That morning he forgot the performance. "You have no idea what you just did," he said. I stood beside the passenger side, my phone still in my hand. "No," I said, "but I'm starting to understand what you did." His face changed, only for a second. Then he laughed softly. "That bank woman got in your head." "No, the account number did." He stepped closer. "Do not make me the enemy because you're scared." I looked at him. 12 years of marriage stood between us like furniture in a dark room. I knew where everything was: his pride, his temper, his wounds, the places I was supposed to step around. "I'm not making you anything," I said. He opened the car door hard enough that it bounced slightly. "Get in." I did. Not because I obeyed him, because I needed to get away from the title company before I came apart in a parking lot under a framed sky with no shade. We drove back to the apartment in silence. That was worse than yelling. Yelling gives shape to damage. Silence lets it spread. At home, Daniel went into the bedroom and shut the door. I heard his voice through the wall once, low and clipped, then nothing. I stood among the boxes from Maple Street: kitchen, books, Mom, Dad. The apartment had large windows and expensive appliances, but it did not have a single shadow that belonged to me. Daniel came out once around dusk. He had changed his shirt, washed his face, put himself back together. "I'm sorry," I snapped, he said from the doorway. I was standing beside the boxes, still in my coat. "But you have to understand what that looked like in there. You made me look like I was trying to steal from you." I waited for him to say he understood why I was scared. He didn't. "I'm trying to keep us from drowning," he said. "And you let a stranger make you suspicious of your own husband." My own husband. He said it like a title deed, like marriage meant he owned the benefit of every doubt. I did not answer. He watched me for a long moment, then went back into the bedroom and closed the door softly. Softly was worse. Softly meant he wanted me to hear restraint and mistake it for mercy. After he left the room, I opened the box labeled Mom. At the top was the blue teacup. The newspaper around it had loosened during the move. When I lifted it, the cup split clean down one side. Not shattered, not dramatic, just cracked in a way that could never become uncracked. I sat on the kitchen floor with it in my lap. That was when I cried. Not in a beautiful way, not in a way that would have made anyone understand. I cried because the money was still there, but the house was not. I cried because a wire transfer could be stopped, but Anna and Ben already had the keys. I cried because Daniel had taken something from me before a single dollar moved. He had taken the last place where I knew how to be a daughter. After a while, I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater and placed the broken cup on the table. Beside it, I put the papers Evelyn had told me not to sign. Then I sat down. This time, I did not read them like a wife trying to save her husband. I read them like a woman trying to find the door out of a burning room. The payoff packet had the lender's name. The wire instructions had a different recipient. The memo line was vague. Urgent business debt payoff. Daniel had always liked vague words when he wanted room to move. My phone buzzed. A text from him, though he was in the bedroom. "We need to talk when you calm down." I stared at it. I typed 3 replies and deleted all of them. "I'm calm. I'm scared. What did you do?" None of them felt safe enough to send. So I left the screen dark and listened to the apartment breathe around me, too new to comfort me, too empty to hide me. For years I had mistaken calm for agreement. That night, calm became something else, a place to stand. The next morning, I called the lender listed in the payoff packet. They would not discuss Daniel's loan. Of course they would not. They would not tell me the balance, the deadline, whether he was behind, or whether anything was escalating. Without discussing Daniel's loan, they could confirm one thing, carefully, professionally. "This account number does not belong to us." That was all. It was enough. I wrote it down on the back of an envelope because my hand needed something to do. Then I called Evelyn Hart. She did not sound surprised. She did not sound pleased. People who work around money learn not to sound pleased when someone else's life begins cracking open. "Ask for any payoff instructions directly from the lender," she said. "Do not use a packet forwarded by your husband. Do not release proceeds until the recipient is verified." "Why did you call me?" I asked. There was a pause. "Because your name is on the release." My name. Again. That small, stubborn fact. After everything Daniel had tried to move around, my name was still attached to the one thing he needed. I thanked her. When I hung up, Daniel came out of the bedroom. His tie was half done. His face was composed again. "Have you calmed down?" he asked. I looked at my mother's cracked blue cup on the table. Yes, I said. For the first time, it was true. I did not confront Daniel that morning. That surprised even me. There had been a younger version of myself who imagined betrayal would turn her into fire. She would scream, throw something, demand the truth with both hands shaking. But real betrayal does something quieter first. It makes you watch. Daniel changed tactics. The first day after the closing room, he was angry. He called me reckless. He said I had embarrassed him. He said I had let a bank employee with half the picture interfere with our marriage. The second day, he softened. He made coffee before I woke up. He stood near the window and said he was sorry for snapping. "I'm under pressure," he said. "I'm not myself." That was one of his favorite sentences. "I'm not myself." As if the cruel version of him had broken into the house and would leave once the crisis passed. The third day, he brought flowers, white lilies. I had never liked lilies. They smelled too much like formal rooms and funerals. Sophie Vale had held lilies in a photograph Margaret posted the previous spring from a charity gala. That was the thing about a cracked marriage. Once the break is there, every small detail drains into it. I smiled when he gave them to me. "Thank you." He searched my face. I gave him nothing. That afternoon, I met Mara Ellison in a narrow office above a bakery on Harbor Street. She was not what I expected. No dramatic suit. No sharp heels clicking across marble. She wore a navy cardigan, silver reading glasses, and the expression of a woman who had seen too many people confuse trust with paperwork. I laid everything on her desk: the payoff packet, the wire instructions, the lender's name, the account number. The FedEx envelope I had not been able to forget. Mara did not interrupt. When she finished reading, she took off her glasses. "Your bank was right to pause this." My mouth went dry. "Can you tell what it is?" "Not all of it. Not yet." Some of it was public record. Some of it Daniel had been careless enough to include in the packet. She tapped the wire instructions. "This is not a lender." Then she tapped the recipient name. "This address belongs to a holding company." Mara turned the laptop toward me. The address appeared before the company name did. I knew it immediately. 2 Decembers earlier, Natalie had invited us there for drinks after a ribbon cutting. She had worn a red coat and stood beneath the black-framed windows while Margaret told everyone how proud she was of a woman who knew how to turn old buildings into opportunities. I remembered Daniel standing beside me that night, his hand at my back, his mouth near my ear. "Natalie sees value where other people see sentiment," he had said. I had laughed because I thought he was teasing. Now I understood he had been translating. Mara clicked again. Marrow Lane Holdings. I had never heard the name before, but the address made my stomach turn. Natalie had walked everyone through it as if she owned the air. Mara looked at me over her glasses. "That company is tied to your sister-in-law." The room did not spin. It narrowed. Mara turned another page. "And this signature belongs to Sophie Vale." Sophie's name sat at the bottom of a consulting agreement. Clean black letters, calm. Like my parents' house was only a number passing through someone else's hands. I had imagined Sophie as a ghost from before me. A woman in an old photograph. A name spoken too warmly at dinner. A laugh Daniel looked toward once and then away from. But ghosts do not sign consulting agreements. Ghosts do not sit near the money. Sophie was not Daniel's past. She was part of the room he had been building without me. I heard Margaret's voice from years ago. Sophie has always been the kind of woman who understands how this family works. Now I did too. Mara did not bury me in legal language. She did not tell me to panic. She only said, "Your husband didn't ask you to save him. He asked you to fund the exit." I looked at the papers. There are sentences that do not hit when they arrive. They enter the room quietly. Then they sit down and ruin everything. On the drive home, I passed a furniture store where Daniel and I had once argued over a dining table. I wanted oak. He wanted glass. He said glass made a room look larger. We bought glass. For years, I cleaned fingerprints from a table I never liked. I thought about that longer than I should have. At home, Daniel was not there. The apartment felt staged and airless. I put the papers in the bottom drawer beneath dish towels because old habits still had muscle. Hide the ugly thing. Keep the room livable. Then I saw wax hardened on the rental dining table from a candle Margaret had brought over. I took out the old kitchen iPad to search how to remove it. The iPad was mine, technically, but Daniel had connected his messages to it years ago when we were renovating Maple Street's bathroom. He traveled often then, and he told me to answer contractors if he was in meetings. Back when he still pretended we were a team. He had remembered to erase bank apps. He had remembered to change passwords. He had remembered to delete emails. But he forgot the kitchen iPad, because he had stopped seeing anything in my kitchen as dangerous. A calendar notification sat in the corner. W/initial consult, 3:30 p.m. I stared at it. The entry did not say divorce. Men like Daniel rarely wrote the ugliest word where anyone could see it. I tapped it. The notes were short: asset separation, post-sale timing, residential proceeds. The date was 2 weeks before he came home with red eyes and a brown envelope. I did not move. The refrigerator hummed behind me. Somewhere upstairs, a child ran across the floor and a woman laughed. Life was continuing in all the apartments around me, careless and ordinary. Then a message appeared. Natalie. Is she really signing? Before I could breathe, Daniel's reply slid beneath it. Once the house money clears, she won't have leverage. I read it once, twice, 3 times. Then I took a screenshot. I sent the screenshots to Mara before I let myself feel anything. That was new. The old me would have asked Daniel first, giving him the chance to turn the room upside down and call it weather. This time I saved the proof before I asked for pain. He didn't need me to save him. He needed me to have nowhere left to go. The front door opened. Daniel walked in with his keys in one hand and his phone in the other. I turned off the iPad before he crossed the room. He saw the iPad. He did not see what had opened. Still, the color left his face. "What are you doing?" he asked. I looked at the wax on the table. "Cleaning up." He stood there. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he smiled. A small smile. "Careful. You should have told me. I know how to get wax off glass." I looked at the table I never wanted. "I'm sure you do." 2 days later, Daniel invited me to his mother's house for dinner. He said it gently, while buttoning his cufflinks in the bedroom mirror. "Mom wants to apologize." I watched his reflection. "For what?" He adjusted the cuff. "For the pressure, for making things worse." Daniel Whitaker had many talents. Asking for forgiveness on behalf of other people was one of them. "She wants all of us to sit down like a family," he said. A family. By then, that word had become a room with no windows. I could have refused. I should have refused. But there are moments when walking into the room is not surrender. It is the only way to stop being haunted by what happened inside it. So I went. Margaret's house looked the way it always looked when she wanted power to appear effortless. Lamps low, silver polished, white candles, linen napkins folded like nothing in that house had ever been used by human hands. Natalie was already there, standing near the bar cart with a glass of wine. Sophie Vale sat at the dining table, cream blouse, gold earrings, hands folded, not surprised to see me. That was the part I noticed first. Not surprised. "I'm only here because Daniel asked me to clarify the financial side," Sophie said. Her voice was smooth. The kind of smooth that had been practiced in rooms where consequences rarely reached the people who made them. I looked at Daniel. He did not look back. Dinner was served, but almost no one ate. Margaret had seated me with my back to the hallway. Daniel sat to my left, Natalie across from me, Sophie beside Margaret, close enough to look included, far enough to look innocent. It was arranged beautifully. That was Margaret's gift. She could make a trap look like a dinner setting. When the salad plates were cleared, Daniel touched my wrist beneath the table. Not hard. Not yet. A reminder. We had done this for years. His hand would speak before his mouth did, and I would answer by becoming easier. Margaret began with a sigh. "This family has suffered enough uncertainty." I watched the candlelight move across her face. Not guilt, not concern. I was looking for something human and finding only posture. Natalie leaned forward. "You're turning a mistake into a scandal, Claire." Sophie added, "You may not understand how these structures work." That almost made me smile. Not because it was funny, because a week earlier, it would have worked. A week earlier, I would have felt embarrassed. I would have folded my hands in my lap and wondered whether my ignorance was hurting Daniel. That night, I simply looked at her. Daniel reached into his folder, the same folder from the title company. He placed a smaller packet in front of me. Temporary release, he said. Nothing permanent, just enough to keep things from collapsing. I looked at the pages. The words were dressed carefully. Consent, authorization, interim, protection. A line can wear perfume too. Daniel placed a pen beside the packet and pushed it toward me. The pen slid across Margaret's polished table. Black plastic against dark wood. The same sound from the closing room. For a second, all I could see was my mother's kitchen wall. Claire, age 6. Claire, age 9. Claire, age 12. Every line proof that someone had watched me grow before these people tried to make me disappear neatly. I picked up the pen. Margaret released a soft breath. Natalie looked down. Daniel's shoulders eased. Then I set the pen back on the table. I opened my purse and took out a manila envelope. No one spoke. That was when I knew they had all been waiting for a different version of me. The version who cried, the version who apologized, the version who believed confusion was her fault. I placed the first page beside Margaret's wine glass. That is the account Daniel gave me. I placed the second page in front of Natalie. That is the company tied to it. Natalie's face tightened. I placed the third page in front of Sophie. And that is your signature. Sophie did not touch the paper. No one reached for the papers. They all looked at me instead. That told me enough. Daniel leaned back. You don't understand what you're looking at. I placed another page on the table, the calendar note, W/initial consult, asset separation, post-sale timing, residential proceeds. Daniel went still. The silence changed. Before that, it had been defensive. Now it had a pulse. I placed the last page down. A screenshot from the iPad. Natalie, is she really signing? Daniel, once the house money clears, she won't have leverage. I read it out loud, slowly. Once the house money clears, she won't have leverage. No one moved. Even the candles seemed to hold still. I looked at Daniel. I sold my parents' house because you told me you were drowning, but all of you were standing on dry land, waiting for me to throw in the deed. Margaret recovered first. People like Margaret always do. Marriage requires sacrifice, she said. I turned to her. He asked me for a house and called it marriage. Daniel pushed his chair back. I was trying to protect us. No, I said. You were trying to make sure I had nowhere left to go. His face twisted. Not grief. Anger wearing grief's coat. You think you know everything because you found a few papers? I know enough. Sophie spoke for the first time without polish. This is not what you think. I looked at her for a long second. No, I said quietly. It's exactly what I think. I just didn't know it would be all of you. Natalie began to cry. The tears came quickly. Too quickly. Margaret put a hand on her shoulder, but her eyes stayed on the papers. Not her daughter. The papers. That was the Whitaker family, right there. They always knew what mattered most. Daniel lowered his voice. Claire, sit down. There it was, the husband voice. The room voice. The tone that had carried me through 12 years of making myself easier to manage. I did not sit. Mara has copies, I said. So if anyone at this table wants to explain this differently, you can explain it to her. I picked up my purse. Daniel said my name when I reached the dining room door. For the first time that night, he did not sound angry. He sounded afraid. Claire. I stopped with my hand on the knob. Behind me, Margaret's candles burned without flickering. Natalie sniffed softly. Sophie said nothing. Daniel breathed like a man standing at the edge of a room he no longer controlled. I did not turn around. Some doors do not need a speech. They only need to close. The wire never went through. That was the first thing. The release stayed unsigned. The settlement proceeds remained where they were while Mara began doing what Daniel had assumed I would never have the nerve to do. Ask questions, get copies, stop apologizing for needing facts. A few days later, Mara asked me about the FedEx envelope. The one at the title company, she said. Do you remember who brought it? Daniel. What was in it? It held the overnight packet Daniel planned to send the moment my signature was on the release. She nodded. She did not make it dramatic. She did not turn the envelope into a weapon larger than it was. But when she looked at me, her voice softened. He had prepared for your yes before you were allowed to say no. That stayed with me. The envelope was not the worst thing Daniel had done. It was not the biggest proof. It was not the thing that ended the marriage. But it showed the shape of his mind. He had pictured my signature before he gave me the whole truth. He had planned the next step before I was given a real choice. He had arranged my obedience and called it timing. After that, things did not explode, not the way people imagine. There was no dramatic arrest in a restaurant, no screaming courthouse scene, no newspaper headline with Daniel's face under words like scandal or fraud. Real consequences often arrive in quieter clothes. Sophie's name disappeared from Marrow Lane's website before the week was over. Then from Margaret's charity board. No announcement, just absence. Natalie sold the condo she had been very careful not to mention. Margaret stopped appearing at the luncheons where she had once spoken about family values as if they were pearls she had inherited. And Daniel, who had built an entire plan around my silence, learned what silence could do when it finally chose a side. He came to the apartment once after Mara filed the first round of papers. I almost did not let him in. Then I looked at the boxes behind me, half unpacked, my life still waiting for a permanent room, and I decided I was tired of being afraid of conversations that belonged to me too. Daniel stood in the doorway wearing the gray coat I had bought him for our 10th anniversary. He looked older, not ruined, just less polished. That seemed fair. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He looked around the apartment like he expected to find evidence of my collapse. There was none. The cracked blue teacup sat on the counter. I had glued it badly. A thin line ran down the side, visible and permanent. Daniel saw it. He did not ask. We sat at the small table. He put his hands together. "I did love you," he said. The sentence came out tired. Maybe he believed it. Maybe part of it was even true. That is the trouble with men like Daniel. They do not always lie cleanly. Sometimes they love you in the same room where they measure what your love is worth. I looked at him. "Maybe," I said, "but you loved what I would give up more." His mouth tightened. "That's not fair." I almost laughed. Fair. A word men remember when consequence enters the room. He blamed Sophie's connections, Natalie's desperation, Margaret's pressure, the debt, the panic, the shame. He gave every reason except the one that mattered. He had chosen himself and called it survival. I let him speak. Not because I believed him, because I no longer needed to interrupt a man to prove I heard him. When he finished, the apartment was very quiet. "You were not afraid I would leave," I said. "You were afraid I still could." He looked down. For the first time, he had no sentence ready. After a long moment, he asked, "What happens to me now?" There it was. The old invitation. Fix this. Feel sorry for me. Carry the part I dropped. I stood and opened the door. That is the first thing in years that is not mine to fix. He looked at me then. Really looked. As if he had finally understood that I was not performing strength until he apologized. I was done. After the divorce began, the money stayed protected. Not all of it. Life is never that clean. There were fees, delays, costs. Pain has invoices, too. But enough remained for me to begin again. Maple Street did not. That was the part people did not understand at first. "You saved the money," a friend said gently. Yes, the money was saved. Maple Street was not. And that was the part no lawyer could return to me. I did not try to take it back from Ben and Anna. For one ugly afternoon, I wanted to. I wanted to call Mara and ask if there was any way, any clause, any mistake in the closing that could pull the house back into my hands. Then I pictured Anna standing in the kitchen with one hand on her stomach, asking if they could keep the pear tree. Daniel had used my pain to justify taking from me. I would not use mine to take from someone else. That was the first boundary I built after him. Not against Daniel, against becoming him. They had bought a house. They had painted the nursery pale yellow. They had kept the pear tree. They had loved it honestly, without needing to make anyone smaller first. A month after the papers were filed, Anna called. "We found a box in the attic," she said. "It has your father's name on it." I drove to Maple Street on a gray Saturday morning. For a moment, I sat across the street with both hands on the steering wheel. The green door had been repainted. A stroller stood on the porch. There were small, muddy shoes beside the mat. Life had entered without asking my permission. Anna opened the door with her baby asleep against her shoulder. "Come in," she whispered. The house smelled different. New paint, laundry soap, a candle I did not recognize. But the afternoon light still fell across the kitchen floor the same way. Anna shifted the baby gently. "I hope it's okay," she said. "We kept the pencil marks in the kitchen wall. They felt like they belonged there." I looked at the wall. Claire, age 6. Claire, age 9. Claire, age 12. Still there. Not mine anymore, but not erased. That was when my throat closed. Not because of cruelty, because of kindness. Sometimes kindness hurts more because it arrives too late to save the thing, but not too late to prove it mattered. I took the box from the attic. Inside were my father's repair tools, a few watch faces, and an envelope with old photographs I had never seen. My mother laughing on the porch. My father holding a pair in one hand like a prize. Me as a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket on the front steps. Before I left, I placed my hand on the kitchen door frame. Not to ask for it back, to say thank you. Then I walked out. Months later, I bought a small house near the water. Not a grand house. Not the kind of place Margaret would have envied. It had a narrow porch, a bright kitchen, and a front door painted deep blue by the previous owner. The paint was chipped near the handle. The floorboards made noise in the hallway. The back steps needed work. It was not Maple Street. That was why I could breathe inside it. I did not want a house that tried to replace my parents. I wanted one that did not ask me to apologize for surviving them. The first week, I left most boxes unopened. I ate toast over the sink. I slept with a lamp on in the hallway, the way my mother had after my father died. Grief has habits. So does freedom. Every morning, I opened one more box, one shelf, one drawer, one small corner of a life no one else was arranging for me. On the day I received the keys, a small card arrived from Evelyn Hart. No speech, no sentiment poured too thick, only one line. "I'm glad your name stayed on something that mattered." I stood in the entryway and read it twice. Then I placed the old Maple Street key in a small ceramic bowl by the door. Beside it, I placed the new one. One key belonged to the place that raised me. The other belonged to the woman who stopped begging to be chosen. Daniel emailed once. "Can we talk like two people who once loved each other?" I read it on the porch while the evening wind moved through the grass. For a while, I did nothing. Then I wrote back. "We already said everything. You just thought I wasn't listening." I never heard from him again. The first morning in the new house, I woke before sunrise. No alarm, no voice, no one moving through another room with anger folded into silence. I made coffee in the bright kitchen. The mug was new, the counter was bare. Outside, gulls moved over the water in thin gray light. I opened the front door and let the air in. No one stood behind me. No one asked me to sign. No one called my sacrifice love. The house I sold had my parents' walls. The house I bought after Daniel had something else. My name, my silence, my peace, and a door no one could open without being invited in. If you're watching this tonight, tell me where you are and what time it is where you're watching. And be honest with me. If someone used your love to take the last thing your parents left you, would you ever let them back through your door?